And to kick us off this morning, I think we have a fantastic panel led by the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times journalist, Jeff Gettleman. This morning's session is Deep Blue Transition, Merging the Green and Blue Agendas. So before we kick off, can I just say to all of you visiting us online from around the world, please make sure that you ask questions via the portal, and we will try and get to as many of them as we can. And just before we start, I would like to say a very warm thank you to Morgan Stanley for supporting this session, and we're just going to play a very brief video before the panelists come on stage. Thank you very much.
I'm Audrey Choi, Chief Sustainability Officer at Morgan Stanley and CEO of the Institute for Sustainable Investing. Welcome to the New York Times Climate Hub, taking place alongside COP26. The health of our planet is now the existential issue for business leaders and government leaders alike. The important conversations happening here in Glasgow are a critical catalyst for the actions we need to take to stem the long-term effects of climate change. Clearly, the time for action is now. To begin, I'd like to share with you some of our best thinking on one of the topics we're here to discuss. Thank you, and enjoy the session.
Green bonds give investors an opportunity not just to get a good return, but also to do good with their money as well. Green bonds are like any other traditional bond, but they come with a commitment from the company to invest in specific projects that achieve an environmental or social outcome. When the green bond market first started back in 2007, 2008, there were small retail targeted transactions. Now, it's over $200 billion a year in issuance. We've seen a full spectrum of projects being supported by green and sustainability bond transactions. Everything from more energy efficient ice cream cabinets to better forestry and farming, through to developing affordable and social housing. The bond market is a natural home for sustainability. Buying green bonds is not just doing good, it's good business. I'm Navindu Katagampala, and we are Morgan Stanley.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. It's really nice to see who I can see, even though these lights are kind of blinding. I'm very happy to be here. We have a great panel today. I work for the New York Times. I am a journalist now based here. Before I was in India, and before that I was in East Africa for many years. I love working at the Times. It's opened up the world to me. I think we have an enormous opportunity to tell stories that make a difference. We're focusing much more on climate these days than we ever have. Stephen has done, who spoke this morning in front of you, he's done an amazing job organizing this event. And our paper is really committed to telling the biggest, most impactful stories we can about climate, with the idea that we really want to grab people by the shoulders and make them care. Not just know, but care. And that's where the skill of telling a story that moves people is really important. Today we're going to have a panel about the oceans and the blue and green agendas. And we have a great group of panelists, and I thought we could start just with a quick introduction. Why don't we start with the people that are here, and then there's 2 other panelists that are joining us virtually. And just tell the audience a little bit about your work, and then we can jump into the questions.
Great.
Please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Dr. Whitney Johnston. I'm Director of Ocean Sustainability at Salesforce, and I'm an oceanographer by training. Climate change is the biggest threat to ocean health, but the ocean also is a source of solutions to the climate crisis. And so I'm here this week to be part of these climate conversations and help really ensure that the ocean is at the center of the decisions and the negotiations that are happening here in Glasgow. So thank you very much for having me.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, good morning, and thanks for having me here. My name is Andrew Scott. I'm the CEO of a small engineering business called Orbital Marine Power. We're based here in Scotland. We're headquartered up in the small archipelago of islands off the north coast of Scotland called Orkney. And we're pioneering a kind of innovative piece of technology in the renewable energy space that can generate clean, predictable power from the world's tidal stream currents. So we see, obviously a role to play in helping decarbonize areas of the world that have tidal stream and complementing that journey through an application of a new technology.
Thanks, Andrew. Friends far away, will you tell us a little bit about yourselves? Let's start with Melati, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melati. Honored to be here today from Bali, Indonesia. I'm 20 years old and a full-time change maker and movement builder. My journey on the front line started when I was 12 years old, when I set out on a mission to make my island home of Bali plastic bag free. We finally achieved this ban and it came into regulation in 2019. Today I focus on my new company called YOUTHTOPIA, hoping to work together with as many young change makers as possible to accelerate the change we need to see. I'm excited for our conversation here today.
Great, thank you. Last but not least, Isabella.
Hey everyone, my name is Isabella. I am a professor at the University of California, San Diego in the Department of Anthropology and at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I am an environmental archaeologist. I work to look at the past, to recover lessons from the past, to understand how our communities responded to climate change through that time, and to recover that knowledge and bring it to the present and transform ancient knowledge into future wisdom. I'm currently calling you from Puerto Rico. I am Boricua. I am here from Puerto Rico, native to this island. I have been working for many years together with our communities to face the challenges that we're currently encountering of climate impacts and weather-related disasters. And I am very happy to be able to be here on my island and in Glasgow at the same time.
That's great. You guys are in beautiful sunny places, and it's kind of dark and gray here. So I'm envious, both places. I want to begin talking about what's often perceived as 2 different agendas, a blue agenda and a green agenda. And I thought that we could start with the panelists just talking about if those really are 2 different agendas or they're one agenda, and how maybe we could better communicate about this, the ocean issues, which often don't get the attention that other climate issues get. So why don't you jump in? Tell us, what do you think? Is there 2 different agendas, or are they really one agenda?
Yeah, great question. I really see this as one agenda. I think it's really important that we're actually focusing on the shared outcomes that we're looking for. So essentially, you might think the green agenda, you might think the blue agenda. Maybe these are the activities that you carry out on land or you carry out in the ocean. But essentially, we need to remember that we're all aiming for better outcomes for people, for biodiversity, for the planet, for climate. And as an oceanographer, in fact, When I was working on my PhD in oceanography, I really realized that you cannot understand the ocean without understanding what's happening on land, without understanding what's happening in the atmosphere. And the same thing is true with, of course, the major global challenges that we're tackling today. We can't tackle them without really understanding that this is a full system, this planet, and all of these components are interconnected, and we need to take a systems view to tackling these challenges.
Okay, that's nicely put. Andrew, what's your take? 2 agendas, 1 agenda?
No, yeah, it's 100%, it's one agenda. It's a little bit like a balloon. If you squeeze a balloon, it'll go out the other end. So if you squeeze on the green agenda, it'll impact on the blue agenda. You squeeze the other way, so it has to be considered, the whole thing together, absolutely.
You guys, Isabella and Melati, how can we better emphasize the ocean issues? And let's start with you, Melati, because you've been working really hard with the issue of plastics in the ocean. I feel like we just, the average person out there is not thinking about the health of the oceans the same way they are about the air and the temperature rise, the other effects of climate change. But how can we get people to care more deeply about the health of the oceans?
Definitely, and Jeffrey, I think in your opening statement as well, how you were talking about the power of storytelling. At the heart of activism is storytelling. It's the ability to make sure that every single person of all walks of life feels this connection to what is happening around them. And I think that one of the biggest issues that we're seeing happen or take place is this disconnect, this massive belief that we are separate from nature and not at all a part of it. So, one of the biggest core techniques or ways that we have worked to make sure that people start caring about the environment, caring about the oceans, is by using storytelling as the biggest medium to mobilize people's connection back with the environment. So for instance, sitting down with the fishermen who go every single day out into the oceans and hear their stories about what they see changing on the grounds. Going with a bunch of school children, actually taking them to the beach and do a cleanup. Everybody loves to go to the ocean, but imagine your responsibility now is to clean the 50 meters with your school group. How much plastic can you collect in 30 minutes? Those sort of hands-on approaches is really what I think we need to see more of in the educational spaces to activate people and have them connected back to nature.
Great answer. Doctor, in Puerto Rico, your thoughts?
When seeing the sea and the oceans and the land as 2 separate things comes from a very particular experience of being mostly based in land. As an islander, we realize as our part of our worldview, we can realize that there is no difference between the land and the sea. Whatever happens in land affects the sea. In the communities that we're working with, the oceans are not a boundary. They are what connects us to the next. That is what connects us to the next island. And everything comes also from the ocean, which means that if we see the ocean as a connector, everything that happens in another place is also affecting me. The plastics that Melati is collecting might not have been produced in Bali, are produced from somewhere else. We have to remember that the lives that are happening in different parts of the planet are merged by the ocean. Therefore, the changes that we're doing in land, the changes that we're doing to protect our ecosystems on land are also important to consider the oceans. In the case of where I am working here in Puerto Rico, the coral reefs are particularly important if we want to think about mitigating the impact of hurricanes, for example, as what happened with Hurricane Maria. We need our coral reefs to be healthy for us to have healthy communities, healthy lives on land, for obtaining food like fishing, for mitigating the impact of the coral reefs, mitigating the impact of the waves on land. So everything is only one thing. We have to remember that we cannot keep 2 separate agendas and both want to have the same end, to be able to be sustainable and happy on Earth in general terms.
But let me just go back to you, Melati, and I'm sorry you're not here. You seem to have a ton of energy, and yeah, it's like I almost feel like you're here. How do you persuade people who are not on the ocean. You can't do the beach cleanup. They're living inland. They're not connected to the ocean. There's plenty of people across the world that the ocean is a far-off, remote place. How do you get them to care?
I think one of the biggest realizations that and by the way, thanks for the energy note. I'm today having my virtual background here to bring a little bit of color
I love
for
it.
there in real life. But yeah, I think, one thing that we have to realize as well is that especially issues like plastic pollution, which is such an in-your-face problem, suddenly you can find it everywhere and anywhere. But I think still the power of storytelling, making sure that we're connecting it on a very human level is key. One of the things that one of the biggest stories I always tell is that, I live on Bali, which is an island. We have only ocean surrounding our 17,000 islands here in Indonesia. But, everybody who eats fish, for example, right? There was an experience that I encountered a couple of years back where I had a local fish prepared in the house as a family, and we cut the fish open, and out of that fish came thick pieces of plastic.
Oh, that's horrible.
It was definitely the worst experience. It felt like a punch in my gut because after all these years of working so hard to eradicate, this consumption of plastic pollution, here was a fish on the dinner table with plastic pieces falling out of it. I think that story is something that always connects with people, who live in a city who are going to go eat fish, or, bringing different types of stories like that into communities that don't necessarily have connection to the ocean or have connection to nature every single day. It's really about showing that their actions matter and that they have the power as individuals to create the world that we want to see.
Okay, no, that's inspiring. I'm sorry about that fish experience. Now, what do you guys think, Andrew and Whitney? How can we tell these stories, or how can we get? I mean, the ocean kind of feels more complicated than other aspects of climate change. You guys are experts. Like, how can we break it down, or humanize it, or give it make it more relatable to people, so there's more activism with the oceans?
So I live in New Mexico, so I don't live next to an ocean. But as I mentioned earlier, I'm also an oceanographer, which means I've studied the physics of the ocean, studied the physics of the atmosphere, and can appreciate and want to share with you that and actually I want to quote the director of Scripps Institution of Oceanography and paraphrase. She said, if you experience weather, you depend on ocean health, essentially. That's a paraphrase. And I think that's so profound because it doesn't matter, you can look at the United States, and if me coming from the United States, I think back to the recent Hurricane Ida, which came from the Gulf, hit Louisiana, and then went up across the United States. So I was looking at the track of Ida yesterday, and it hit so many states. I should have counted how many states it hit, and then came across the Northeast. And so this impacted people in the middle of the country. It's not just the communities that are on the coastlines. And when you think about then, well, what does that look like? You can look at the news stories, look at, what happens when their streets are flooded? What happens when their businesses are closed for weeks, when they don't have energy or power for weeks? Maybe they need to be displaced for a period of time from their homes. These have real impacts for people's safety, for people's health, for the local economy, for the businesses that are closed down, for the businesses where their employees can't show up, or maybe their employees aren't well, right? So this permeates in so many different ways our well-being from an economic standpoint, from a heart and soul standpoint, and from our physical health and safety and wellness. And it's not just the communities on the coastline that are impacted. It's those in the middle of the country as well. No matter where you are on the planet, if you experience weather, you should care about ocean health. Again, because of how climate and weather work, and the physics, or the basic physics of how the planet works.
No, that's a great transition to physics. So Andrew, tell us about your work. So Andrew works on tidal energy, and most of us don't quite know the ins and outs of that. Will you just give us a little snapshot?
Yeah, well, I think exactly on the point is, it's storytelling. We're a mission-driven business, so we've got vision, and we've been really successful. I mean, we've been in it for a long time, but we wanted to increase people's awareness and understanding of this potential new resource that could be could be harnessed. So, you know, we invested quite heavily in reaching out to all stakeholders. A lot of it, you know, I think social media is a huge tool for that. But you've got to distill that down to a simple message and a really clear, crisp vision that people can relate to. So, you know, we went through a couple of crowdfunding raises as well. And, you know, I found it really uplifting. You know, there's so many people out there that want to engage directly. Peer-to-peer lending and things like that is a fantastic way of doing it. But it does really challenge you as an organization. Whatever your mission is, your vision is you've got to really try and capture that in a relatable, simple, compelling story that people effectively will stop scrolling through their feeds and engage with you, engage with what you're trying to do. So, you know, I think it is all about storytelling. It's all about educating people. You know, the ocean, I think, unfortunately, the ocean is at so many crisis points across its ecosystems that there's just massively evident data out there that people can draw on, and so they should, and really bring people into the whole ocean story.
Can you just tell us a little bit about your work and how you produce energy from tidal energy?
Yeah, well, actually, we've got great assets on social media. If you just log on, it's really difficult to kind of explain it. The technology actually looks like an airplane or a spacecraft. It's kind of innovative and unique because it actually floats. So we can build these things. We just built the world's most powerful tidal turbine here in Scotland, and it's now generating power into the grid up in Orkney. So once they're built, we can tow them with low-cost vessels, and we anchor them with some big anchors in tidal flows, and then there's a cable that comes out of the machine. It's got two kind of legs that act like wings, and at the end of them are rotors that capture the energy and generate clean, predictable power. And a lot of it, you know, again, I think coming back to the kind of, you know, the wider blue economy sort of thing, part of it is, you know, I think net zero, we have to bring people along on a just transition. That means, you know, we've got to create economies that are clean and sustainable. So a lot of the work that we do clearly creates jobs in manufacturing. But, you know, I think, again, as a huge motivator for us and an enriching process is generating jobs in coastal peripheral communities. So, you know, we're based up in Orkney. It's a small island. It's only got a population of about 20,000 people. You know, we're starting to become one of the larger employers there, and it's a young workforce. And I find that, you know, a really exciting and rewarding part of the job is, you know, creating an alternative where they don't have to leave their communities to go to London to find jobs, well-paid jobs and things, is that we can create a sustainable industry on the island where they can stay in the communities and get a fulfilling, rewarding job that's, you know, helping the entire community and the wider world help to get to net zero. So I think, you know, it's all good.
No, that's great. I mean, when we think of communities, we often think of helping communities in a almost like an aid dependency way. But what you're saying is you can think of communities as employers or employees, and you know, there's a different relationship, which it hadn't occurred to me at first, and I think that's a really good point. Let me bring you guys in. Let's talk about, speaking of communities, where have been some of the more successful community-led efforts to protect the oceans that you guys know about, where people were really invested and they did work that we could emulate in other places?
In my case, I have been working with these communities in Puerto Rico, thinking about the question that you asked earlier about, you know, about activism and storytelling. Immediately after Hurricane Maria, the communities that I'm working with here on the north coast of Puerto Rico were very, very severely impacted. Many lost everything. Melanie was saying earlier about being being for weeks without power. Here we were about over a year without power, and still there are many issues that are happening. When you come to communities that are impacted by disaster and by colonialism and by capitalist exploitation, then asking them to respond effectively to mitigate climate change or to do climate action, it's another burden that we're putting on these communities. They feel already powerless. They feel already tired and devastated by these disasters. But when we can then see stories that link heritage, that link identity, and identify how much it means for you at a personal level, then climate action is meaningful. If I come to Puerto Rico and talk about climate change only of melting glaciers and polar bears, it doesn't make sense here. So we use the process of coastal erosion to see our past on the land, to see how we have been living on these islands for over 5,000 years or even more. We can see our ancestors in the land, and we can see how the ocean is washing our past away. And by seeing that connection to the land, then we can say, okay, this is going away. What can we do? Well, we can mitigate coastal erosion by investing in green and nature-based solutions that are very cost efficient and that the communities can do themselves. So we partner with with our volunteers here. We developed a biomimicry system to reconstruct sand dunes that were damaged by the hurricane. We have been able to restore a sand dune. We have been able to restore a coastal ecosystem. We have been able to use archaeology to recover knowledge from our past. And now the communities yesterday were telling me, we are powerful, we know we have this knowledge, we want to go and train on the communities to stimulate them for climate action, because this climate change is happening, it's already here, and we have the possibility of adapting and moving forward in adaptation. We can do more for our own island and our own lives based on who we are, on our identity. And a lot of that identity is also on the water. So that is another point where green and blue merge. The construction and exploitation of offshore opportunities will impact our past that is right now drowned because of ancient sea level rise. So there are many things here where we can connect information and empower communities for climate action in a way that is culturally sensitive, in a way that is meaningful to their own identity, and is realistic to the conditions of each individual group. So I think that is a great success, to be able to see the communities not leaving me anymore, doing things on their own because they want to, because they see possibilities of things that are realistic and they can do for themselves and for their own people.
Can I just ask, Melati, before we go to you, let me just ask one follow-up. What is that example of using archaeology to see how the community had dealt with these issues? Tell us just briefly, like, what you found out.
Yes, we have been investigating some archaeological sites here on the North Coast. Puerto Rico is on the path of hurricanes. We have seen hurricanes before. We have seen climate change before. And we are working to explore how have our ancestors lived in this ecosystem and how this ecosystem, Puerto Rico as an island, and the Caribbean Sea as a region, how climate change has happened here before and how did our ancestors answer to it. So we are looking at food exploitation, and we are also exploring habitat security, food security and habitat security, which ecosystems people exploited in the past, how climate change, sea level rise, surface temperature change, and hurricane impact. How these affected the ancient ecosystems and what people did when that happened. We have been able to see that ancient impact of coral reefs, and we have also been able to see how much the ecosystems have changed through time, linked to climate change and linked to human impact. So right now we are collaborating with local fishermen to see their personal knowledge in the present about the coastal ecosystems of mangrove wetlands, estuaries, and coral reefs, and comparing their personal data in the present to the past. And we are being able to see similarities. People are still going to the same ecosystem, but also change. How much the ecosystems in the present have lost their productivity, not just because of human activity, of fishing, but also of development, how much it has damaged the ecosystem. And climate change is certainly a very, very impactful element that we have to take into consideration for food and habitat security. And so we are partnering in that sense to use the archaeology also to learn about the past and what solutions people used in the past, like shifting diet in the case of an emergency. We have seen that in the archaeological record.
No, it's really interesting to think that people have been through this before. So what can we glean from the past? Melati, you talked a little bit about like taking the kids out to the beach to have them, race to see how much plastic they could pick up, turn it into a game. Give us a little more. I mean, Indonesia is, like you said, 17,000 islands spread across a space the size of the United States. Beautiful country. I've spent a lot of time there. It's one of my favorite places in the world. Are there some other examples across Indonesia where communities really took a stake? Because so many of those, I mean, there's no country in the world that has as many islands, and so this is going to mean more to Indonesia than maybe anywhere.
Definitely, I think one of our most exciting projects that we've worked on is our educational booklets that we've distributed to thousands of students across Indonesia. And I think that this is really our focus as a youth-led movement to see how can we spread as much awareness to the young people, because we believe that we can accelerate that change. But if we don't know about the problems, it's hard to get involved in the solution. So we focus really a lot on working together with schools and with students, but that's also where a big call out, and I think a missing part maybe in this conversation as well, is putting the pressure and the responsibility on a more systemic change where governments need to implement this in the national curriculum. Why are we still not learning about plastic pollution? Why are we still not learning about the climate crisis or about new and innovative business models? I think this is a massive opportunity that we're missing, not seeing enough of implemented in national curriculums, not only here in Indonesia, but globally. Talking and going back to community power, one of the greatest examples that I can share with you today is a social enterprise we set up in the mountains of Bali, a community that's very far away from the ocean and yet still understood that their consumption of plastic on land was somehow entering the rivers, which led to the oceans. So the social enterprise we set up was to empower the women in a local village called Batukaru, and on the slopes of Mount Batukaru, where we empowered the women to produce alternative bags from pre-loved materials. So social enterprises with a circular system. So here, what I have right here in front of me is an alternative bag made from pre-loved materials, actually the factory offcuts of a really big fashion brand here on Bali that we've partnered up with. Usually this excess material would be sent to landfill, but instead now come to this community where we have a group of 50 women, we call it Mountain Mamas, who produce these bags, get paid individually for these bags. Then 50% of the retail prices of these bags go back to our NGO, and 50% goes back into the community, which then funds three things: the healthcare, the waste management, which currently didn't exist, and goes back into education. So those three items bring the circle round. And I think it's those type of business models that more communities really need to start thinking of to put not only sustainable economic models, but also empowering the community and letting the sustainability really thrive and be a core DNA of every community in the world.
No, those bags are great. I wish we had some here. Have you had any success in trying to reach the higher levels of the Indonesian government? Like your ideas of trying to introduce climate change as part of the national curriculum, that seems really obvious. Can you guys get to the ministers or get to people who can get to the ministers and present these ideas?
I'm still waiting for this opportunity. We've been approached by a couple different government departments, and it is a lot of meetings and relationship buildings, but I also think it's time, and especially with our new company, YOUTHTOPIA. I'll show you quickly and move my... If you can look here, I'm at my office in Bali and at our headquarters. All of these young people here are individuals around the world, part of our YOUTHTOPIA Circle of Youth Network, and we have ready-to-go programs that help inspire and empower as many young people as possible with the role models we need, which are other young people just like us, our age, who are out there making a difference. So I really think that yeah, this is the next step and the next focus for us to work together with educational ministries around the world to help them create these programs for students.
You know, what you really,
I would like to-
what you really need is bottom up and top down. Like, you need both. Like, you need it to be organic coming from the communities, but there's also a lot of power a central government has if it adopts some of these policies. So you really need, like, for any big change, you need both. You can't, it's hard to do it just from the grassroots, and it's hard to do it from the top down if there isn't buy-in at the grassroots. So it seems like you have, like, you know, a lot of power and a lot of energy, and you just, when I listen to you, I just hope that people would take you seriously at the highest level so you could share these ideas, because they probably haven't thought of them, you know? And it's like, you need to expose them. We have a little time before we go to questions. One last thing, and I would love to get your expertise. Is there part of the world that's doing a better job protecting the ocean? I realize the oceans are completely interconnected, but is there a part of the world that is making more progress, and then is there a part of the world that's way behind?
Great question. I'm going to say yes and no, okay? So yes, in that, so first I want to share an example of some news that we heard about last week. So last week, I learned that Costa Rica, Colombia, Ecuador, and Panama joined their marine protected areas and expanded those marine protected areas. So this is a great, what I love about this example is that it shows collaboration between countries to protect the ocean and that leadership, but it also shows this idea of connected ecosystems like we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. The organisms in the ocean, they don't know these political boundaries, but they need large corridors in order to thrive, and they need these connected ecosystems. So I think that's a really great example of what success can look like. But the other thing that I want to point out is that the science shows us that we need to protect at least 30% of the ocean by 2030 and 50% of the ocean by 2050. And don't get caught up so much in the numbers, so much as what that means. It means large-scale nature protection is what we need in order for nature then to do the wonderful things that it does, which supports life on this planet. We only have less than 3% of the ocean is protected, fully or highly protected, and less than 10% has some sort of protection in place. So we've got a long way to go. So the answer is yes and no, in that we have some great examples that are being put in place, but we all have more work to do. And I think that one thing that's important to keep in mind is that it's not just for governments to put this in place. Local communities have the power to work together and bring stakeholders around the table to implement protections for their land, water, and oceans locally. And this really, like you said, it needs to happen on a local level, and it also needs to happen in these large, United Nations kind of conventions and convenings. And I think that's how we're going to really achieve the outcomes that we need for people, planet, and climate.
When you say protected, like what type of restrictions would be in a protected area of the ocean?
So protections can, like the definitions of protections and how they're implemented can change around the globe. And so some examples of protections might be specifying what kinds of activities can happen there, so what kinds of fishing activities or what kinds of fishing gear can be used, or maybe even when the fishing or maybe it's recreational activities, or there's naval operations, or implementation of large infrastructure in the ocean. All of these different competing activities, it's really defining like where they happen and when they can happen, so as to really work in harmony with what nature also needs. Because some of these areas, really nature depends on those as breeding grounds or significant feeding grounds for significant species in the ocean. So to protect biodiversity, we really need to understand how the ocean is used by all of these different stakeholders, like whales being stakeholders as well as people, and see, how can we optimize the activities in the ocean so we have best outcomes for everyone.
Great. We have about a little more than 10 minutes left. I'd love to hear some questions from you guys who've come to listen in the audience, and if we have any from online. Stephen, you're not allowed to ask a question.
Oh.
You can ask me later.
You should go first. Okay, all right. Anyway, thank you very much. Very interesting conversation I'm hearing. My name is Tan Golokin. I'm from Malaysia. And I can really appreciate what that young lady is going through, because I know your Minister of Environment and Forestry, Dr. Siti Nurbahaya. And I was actually having a conversation with her in 2017, how to protect your tropical rainforest. And I think it's not easy to go through the government bureaucracy and so on. But I have good news for you. I just signed an agreement with the state government of Sabah to protect 2 million hectares of tropical rainforest for 100 years. So nobody's going to do logging there, nobody's going to do poaching there, nobody's going to do squatting there, but to do nothing but conservation. I'll take your number and maybe I can share you some idea how to go about getting government support. It took me 4 years to sign this agreement. I'm very happy to report to you that it can be done with patience, with perseverance, and with the right network, you'll be able to get it. So as I said, on the 28th of October 2021, I signed 2 million hectares of tropical rainforest to be permanently conserved for the next 100 years. Okay?
Let's give that man a round of applause.
Here's the agreement, okay? It's a nature conservation agreement.
Can I just ask one quick follow-up before we move to another question? Just while we're on it, and please be brief. What would you advise her? No, I'm asking you. Well, you, because you just to follow.
A lot of patience. A lot of patience.
Okay, but we don't have a lot of time. So how do you reconcile that?
Well, I was a little bit fortunate because the Deputy Chief Minister of Sabah is a PhD graduate from Harvard. And he understood what I was trying to achieve. And I worked very, very closely with him. And finally, we got that agreement signed on the 20th of October, 2021. A lot of patience, but there is also a lot of politics involved, so you have to be very, very patient.
But that's also an example of looking for a window. Like you had somebody in the government who you felt had the right mindset. And so that's something that, knock on the right door and you might get a better answer.
Malaysia is not a transaction society, it's a connection society. So you get to know someone who can help you navigate those uncharted territories.
That's great. Well, congratulations. Thank you for sharing that. Yes. Next question, please.
Got a bunch of questions. Is this working? Yes. And we also have, I understand, one of the top oceanographer scientists of the Natural History Museum in the room, so maybe he's better placed to answer questions. The question I have, Scott, is for you. And by the way, yours is talking about storytelling. Your story is pretty extraordinary. But how replicable is this? It strikes me that there's so many powerful tidal parts of the world, and you've created something here that's obviously working. Is it why aren't we doing this more often? That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, is there any collateral damage to fish, etc., in the Orkney?
Yeah, sure. So maybe take them stepwise. So the reason it's why we're not doing it is funding, it's cash. It takes time to bring, the lead-in time of technology is a long time. So, we've been at this for 20 years. We could have shortcutted that by more investment, but we haven't had government policy supporting us. You have to create markets for the solutions if you want to drive private sector investment. Private sector is more mobilized now than ever to invest in low carbon ESG space. But if you don't have policy alignment, you can't attract investment. So, I think we don't have the correct policy alignment here, to go faster with more things. I think we need to step it up a number of gears here in terms of climate change. So policymakers have got to be bold. They've got to create vision. Even if there's a technology space, they've got to lead by vision. So yeah, we could have done it quicker, and we could be further along if we'd been able to raise more money and direct more investment. It does depress me how much, how little it is that we actually have been able to raise into this space. Where it can apply, yeah, tidal stream is not everywhere. Interestingly, Bali sits right next to one of the biggest tidal stream sites in the world, and you potentially could power Bali from tidal stream power. But it is quite niche, for want of a better word, and I think that's some of the other things that you've got to, I've had to wrestle with at a personal level in a way, is that I think a lot of people feel like climate change is such an overwhelmingly huge challenge, is that you can feel as an individual quite ineffective against it. And I think you have to be very careful that then translates into inaction because you don't know what to do. One of the things that I kind of feel like, in a way, our business mission is an inspiration to do action, is to don't sit and do nothing, because that's the very worst thing that we can do right now, is go out there, have a vision, have a dream, whatever it is, and go and do it, because inaction is not an option, as I said. So that's kind of maybe the tidal side. In terms of ecological, panelists here will understand, the marine environment actually is very challenging to characterize from an environmental perspective. Tidal stream sites actually are very challenging as well, because the water moves all the time very quickly. But we spent a huge amount, both as a company, as an industry, monitoring ecological interaction. We've got a diverse ecosystem in the Orkneys, everything from obviously fish and cetaceans, seals and things, and overwhelmingly, thus far, benign, completely benign interaction with marine mammals and so forth. That's not to say that we can rest on our laurels. I think one of the things, you have to be able to monitor and justify your position and measure and quantify. We have to accept nothing's perfect. There is always environmental impact with everything that we do. And maybe just going back a little bit in terms of, governing and controlling that, I think we are pushed through, as a renewable industry, we're pushed through a very heavy mesh of scrutiny on the environmental interaction. And there are some kind of stark inequalities there. Mm-hmm. And, when you look across to things like the status quo being maintained in fishing, bottom trawling, and all these sorts of activities, that, we do have empirical evidence of the amount of damage that's being done, yet they seem to be able to perpetuate those business models and industries almost without any accountability. So does that, hopefully that answers.
No, it's a great answer. Other questions?
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Yaniv, and I was thinking about the data centers that Microsoft is now landing inside the oceans. And I'd like to know what's your opinion about it, and how does the ocean gets back something after we use it, same as we do it with land all the time.
Yeah, I'm
please,
happy to take
please.
this. I think it's very exciting, and it's testament to the fact that we need technology, and we all need to bring our superpowers. So actually, I want to challenge everyone in this room and everyone who's watching, right, to think about, like, what is your superpower? Whether it's your particular professional power or the thing that brings you joy, and think about your community that you can access, maybe the school where your children go to school. How can you tap into those communities, and how can you really leverage your superpower? Because you don't actually need to be an oceanographer to make a difference, or a climate scientist to make a difference. You don't need a degree in environmental science, for example. We actually, in order for us to tackle this challenge, we need technology, we need artists, we need people with marketing skills and legal skills. We need people with the whole suite. We need actually to transform the entire economy. So every job right now can be a climate job. And so that's the kind of the challenge that I want to put forward, is that we need each of these companies to think about the resource that they have, the employees that they have, the reach that they have, the technology that they have, and bring that to bear. And we also need individuals to think about their own superpowers and how they can plug that in with the community around them in order to scale their impact. So, yes.
I think just going on that, Microsoft actually installed a data server center in the underwater in Orkney, actually, and I think it was a big success. Heat sink, you know, because that's big. So I think it's great, you know, that people are looking and understanding that the oceans around us can provide huge sustainable solutions and make a big contribution. But we do need to, you know, make sure that's done in a sustainable way. And as I said, from our perspective as well, that's as much about, you know, the just transition, creating jobs in the peripheral regions and the coastal communities and things. And we just need to make sure that we're, you know, caring for the ocean in terms of how we use it right now as well.
Okay, guys, we're basically out of time. I really appreciate everybody coming in to hear us in person, and whoever has been tuning in online. We all appreciate it. And it's been a real pleasure. I mean, we have such different voices and perspectives on this issue, and it's been a real honor to be on this panel with you guys. So I hope we can stay in touch and follow each other's work. And I just want to say thanks on behalf of all of us for attending this session. Thank you.